Good afternoon. Welcome to Exploring Next Generation Education, K-12 Trends That Matter for 2022. I'm your host, Dr. Hiller Spires, Executive Director of the Friday Institute and Associate Dean in the College of Education at North Carolina State University. Yes, we've had another extremely challenging year, a global pandemic, ongoing racial injustice and inequities, economic challenges, an insurrection on our state's capital, and a new variant with Omicron. Educators have navigated their way through these compounded issues. They've summoned their creativity and resiliency to support and engage students. With this dramatic backdrop, we move into 2022 with disappointments and frustration combined with hope for a brighter collective future. The goal of our panel discussion today is to surface K-12 trends that matter for 2022. For example, as community members, what do we need to be relentless about? As policymakers, what do we need to let go? As educators, how do we create space for transformation that can usher in new ways of thinking about and doing education? So joining me today to address these questions and much more, I'm delighted that we have a distinguished panel of guests. How are you guys doing today? How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Great. Good. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to introduce each one of you. I'll start with Dr. Vanessa Siddle-Walker. Vanessa is Samuel Candler Dobbs Professor of African American Educational Studies at Emory University. Next, we have Thomas Arnett, Senior Research Fellow for Education at the Clayton Christensen Institute. Justina Nixon, Vice President, Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance and Corporate Social Responsibility. And Dr. Punya Mishra, Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation and Professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, Arizona State University. So thank you so much for being with us. The way we're going to do our panel today is each one of you are going to have about 5 minutes to share your thoughts about what the top trends are that you think are most significant and matter the most for our context of 2022 now. And then after each one of you talk and we listen to that, to what you have to say, then I'm going to facilitate a conversation across panelists. So we're going to get started with Vanessa. Vanessa, with a career spanning 4 decades and as an educational historian, you've researched the effects of segregated schooling and the push for equity for African American children. How do you think understanding segregation can help inform educators as they navigate racial injustice at this moment in time within our nation? And what trends matter for this upcoming year from your point of view?
Thanks, Hiller. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity to speak for these 5 minutes. It takes me 5 minutes to say hello, but I will try very quickly to summarize some of the major points that I think we need to think about. So here's the problem. We operate from the assumption that we actually know what the history was. We believe, in effect, the lie, the incomplete truth that was given to us at desegregation, which was essentially that Black teachers were poorly educated, the schools were awful, the parents didn't do anything, children didn't know anything, and basically not until we rescued them did anything matter good for those children. This is problematic because as I had spent the last several decades studying the segregated schooling of African American children, what I've learned is that there was a different history. There's a history of resilience. And this resilience was always a pushback against the inequality of opportunities that we saw. So there's resilience and there's the push down. It's through the lens of these educators that I want to answer Hiller's question about where we are today and how we might think. As a person talking about history, I'm less interested in how the history directly informs us as much as I am interested in how we need to think about importing the history to begin to solve our problems. So I want to offer 3 ideas through their wisdom and their practice that I hope might be useful. 1, 100 years of looking at these people, be impressed with educational challenges, contextual challenges is honestly nothing new. So we want to imagine ourselves as in a place where the oppression is just so awful because all of these things are happening to us. And I just want to remind you that these educators faced the 1917 epidemic that we're now learning about, the Depression, World War I, World War II, segregation, lack of medical care, voting denial, lynchings. Yes, many teachers were lynched for over 100 years. We don't see them complaining about it. What we see is them taking ownership and responsibility for their moment in history and figuring out how do we move forward. So the first thing I want to say from their lens is let's don't get bogged down with the problems so that we have an inertia about them. The truth is we can have agency in the midst of all that's happening. The second point I think that remind us is that we need to focus on the possibilities and the places for which we have control. Schools are our domain. We say we know something about them and how children should be educated. And what we see historically is a singular kind of focus on making sure that there was intentionality with curriculum, not just what the state said, but going beyond. Parental involvement, professional networking, caring and demanding school climates, extracurricular opportunities as tools for individual development, civics, democracy, personal resilience. All of these areas of curriculum happen in segregated schools, and they happen in conjunction with one another, not bifurcated, not one piece. We talk about this as though it has nothing to do with something else. I think the concept that they bring to us, that there are domains that need to be considered in schools, that they are conjoined and not separate, and that they are problems to be solved, not problems to be talked about, but problems to actually be solved. That's a second area that Black educators would remind us in this particular era. The third, seeing evil against children and being silent is not an option. I spent a lot of time in my very fancy societies, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and National Academy of Education. I see a lot of great research, but I do not always see a push towards making sure that we know children need, we actually take it on ourselves to make sure that it happens. Historically, we see Black educators taking responsibility, not just within the school, but external to the school in their networks and their collaborations with other people to be certain that the evils perpetrated against the children were being addressed. Did it matter? I would say absolutely it did matter. The Rosenwald schools that we know about, Black teachers. The WPA money during World War II, Black teachers. The New Kent County case that forced integration in 1969, Black teachers. Brown v. Board of Education, Black teachers. And the people, Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, and any number of other leaders that you can name, are all the products of these schools. They are created beings. It's not that they are individually, intellectually so brilliant beyond everybody else. I'm not saying they weren't brilliant, but I'm saying that they were created by the schools and the teachers, and we have to remember that. So what do we need to do in the current era? I really would strongly encourage us to begin to think more deeply about what we have lost. The assumptions that we've been given about who these people are and what their schools were are absolutely not the full historical truth. It is, as the old Jewish prophet would say, can we not look at this thing and see that it is a lie? I think it's time to dismantle the lie, look carefully back at what they knew about how to actually teach children and advocate for children, and be committed to continuing to do the work for them, notwithstanding what the external context was, and make a difference in the lives of the children for which they were responsible. I think if we look back, we might be surprised at what we would actually learn. That's my 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your thoughtful reflections. I really like the point, Vanessa, that you're driving home about, as you say, these brilliant Black leaders. They were and are the product of the schools of the time. And that's something that we just don't think about. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Very important. Okay, we're going to move on now to Thomas. We're going to shift gears here. Thomas, in one of your recent publications, and you already know this because I love that publication, Breaking the Mold, How a Global Pandemic Unlocks Innovation in K-12 Instruction, you mentioned several innovation outliers pertaining to student learning. What specifically can you tell us about the value of student-centered practices as they are related to overcoming some of the challenges posed in the pandemic? And what are your thoughts on how teacher education can evolve to support teachers as they navigate what we hope will soon be a post-pandemic world? So we'd love for you to share your thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hiller, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot. I've already been learning a lot from Vanessa, and I'm so grateful to go after her because I think she's got such this big picture view, can kind of stand on the top of the mountain and see the landscape, where so often we get stuck in, the little weeds of navigating between one tree and the next. To tie into the question you were asking, and to highlight some of the trends I see, we're living in a really challenging time for education, for educators, for students. Some of the surveys that we've been running recently have shown that educators are really struggling right now, struggling with just the variation in students' needs in their classroom because instruction was really hit and miss over the last 2 years, and so some students have big gaps, some students have small gaps, and how do you handle all that? On top of that, between the pandemic and the racial unrest, there's a lot of social and emotional challenges students have been dealing with, and that's spilling over into schools. One of our surveys, most recent survey, 60% of teachers said that helping support the added social and emotional challenges that students face right now is one of their biggest challenges. And on top of that, you've got Omicron and schools having to, after having started in more of an in-person format or more of a regular format at the beginning of this school year, many are having to go back to remote instruction. On top of that, you've got teacher shortages, buildings that just don't have enough staff, and where people are having to really fill in places they normally can't fill in, and it's just strapped capacity. And so, unfortunately, I don't think there's any big thing that's coming right around the corner to make that all go away. But I do think there are some opportunities that are the seeds of which are being planted right now that could really help solve some of those challenges. The reality is that the school system we have right now just wasn't designed for the circumstances we're in. Conventional schooling, to work well, students need to show up every day in school. There's a 180-day calendar, and there's instructional minutes, and there's a pacing guide. And if students aren't, if they're not ready to learn on that schedule in cohorts, the system really struggles. So we don't have a system that's adapted well to students missing class periodically because of quarantines, or students showing up to school but maybe not being ready to learn because of all the other stuff going on in their lives. In contrast, in some of our research, we've seen schools that are really adept at managing those, and not just managing, but really supporting students in their varied needs, that can be much more flexible around the timing, the pacing, the pathway students follow, and that really leverage technology to do that effectively. But I'd say right now, there's also a trend in that I think technology is getting a real pushback, because a lot of people experienced online learning last year for remote instruction, hybrid instruction, and it wasn't great. So I guess I want to point out now kind of a distinction in that technology is not a kind of a uniform thing. There's some technology that takes a conventional classroom and enhances it, like a learning management system that makes it easier to distribute and collect assignments and to keep track of students' grades and make class announcements. So that's really to enhance the way things are usually done. There's some uses of technology that are just about trying to take a conventional classroom and port it over the internet for remote instruction or for hybrid instruction. And so we saw a lot of that last year with what was often called the Zoom in room model, where you had some students in a classroom, some students remotely, and a teacher's trying to teach a live lesson to both at the same time. And it was just logistically really hard to manage and didn't work well. And I put those two uses of technology in contrast with another one, which is really taking advantage of the fact that students have an innate curiosity, and they have an aptitude to learn things, whether or not they're being guided by a teacher. You can see this: students that learn how to, play the guitar by tinkering with it, or students that learn how to skateboard by trying things out, or students that go online and watch YouTube videos to learn a whole host of different skills. And so, in many ways, I think of online learning, when used well, as kind of just the natural extension of the printing press. The printing press was a technology that made it so people could learn outside of their immediate, whoever was there to teach them or whoever was in their community. It broadened access to learning. And in many ways, online learning does that as well. And there's schools that take advantage of that to really free up the constraints of the conventional model, where students don't have to be learning the same thing at the same time under the direct direction of a teacher. But that doesn't mean that students are just on their own. Okay, I don't want to paint a picture that makes it seem that what we're trying to do is just put students on the internet and have them learn everything on their own, in their homes by themselves. But the places that do this well, they take advantage of those technologies to then shift the nature of the classroom and the nature of the role of teachers, where it's less about, okay, we all have to sit down and pay attention so we can cover content. And it's more about teachers saying, look, a lot of the content you can learn it from some really great resources, but how do we create the learning experiences that really build on that foundational content, whether that's, putting you in teams to work on projects, teachers functioning as mentors as much as instructional leaders, teachers really focusing on the things that technology can't do, like giving high quality feedback on an essay or on a project or on a team, a team project. So we see schools doing that really well, but it's such a different model from conventional instruction that it's not an easy shift to just go from one to the other. So I guess the last trend I'll highlight is that I think there's seeds being planted right now where some schools in some parts of the country are experimenting with these new models of instruction, not as the end all be all solution that they're trying to push everybody into, but rather as the places where they're incubating for the students who are most, having the hardest time being in school every day. Can we provide them an option? And then my hope is that they don't see those just as stopgaps, but as programs that they start now and improve over time until they really prove what's possible, when you can break down the constraints of instruction having to happen at the same time in the same place with everyone on the same trajectory.
Thank you. I think that you make a very good point about these new models of instruction that really have come about out of necessity, right? Because of the pandemic. And I think all of us are trying to figure out how do we harness that and pull it forward so that it can be powerful models, not just in the context of a pandemic, but that, could be useful and be able to reach all kids, not just some kids. So thank you for those perspectives. I appreciate that. We're going to move now to Justina. Justina, last year you spoke during an episode of the Getting Smart podcast. I don't know if you remember that or not, but you argued for intentional organizational focus on preparing underrepresented communities with the skills for professional employment in the tech industry. And how does IBM's P-TECH project help achieve this goal? And what other kinds of educational initiatives might we consider as we confront inequities accelerated by the pandemic? Do you have any thoughts on that and the ideas that you want to share with us?
Yes, I do. First of all, it was so great hearing Vanessa and Thomas. And Thomas, I think I'm hearing birds in your background, I think. So you must be in a lovely location.
He's in Hawaii.
Oh, of course, of course. And
Just
here,
on a visit.
here I am in New Jersey. So yeah, so so there are a couple things I wanted to touch on, and Thomas actually brought up some of these points as well. So at IBM, we've been very focused on how do we make sure young people are prepared for the workforce, and how do we make sure they have workplace learning opportunities, they have access to credentials and badges where they're learning a new area, for example, artificial intelligence or cloud computing or data analytics or cybersecurity, which is one of the fields that we get a lot more interest in from high school students. So we've launched programs like P-Tech, where we provide a free high school and community college degree, especially for under-resourced populations. We focus on students that are in high, free, and reduced lunch schools, and we bring them into the workplace. So we partner with those schools to make sure the students come in, they have access to real world opportunities and practices, and we pay them, right? We make sure we pay them for those opportunities as well. And we also partner with 600 other companies globally to provide the same experience for those students. And at the end, we give them an opportunity for an interview. So we actually make sure that we have jobs available for them and that we interview them and place them into jobs. So I think that's the holistic way that we feel that we need to prepare young people, especially those who are in communities that have been marginalized, and make sure they have all of the support they need. One of the things that I wanted to touch on that hasn't been raised yet is there's a bit of an elephant in the room when you think about high school students. I was reading an article the other day that said, because of the demand in the job market right now, we have a lot of students who are seeking jobs that are paying really well right now. They can get a badge, they can get a credential in a tech area. We offer it through our Skills Build program as well. So we do offer that opportunity. And then they're moving into jobs right away instead of going into community college or instead of going into a four-year university. So that's something I think we have to just keep an eye on, because are these students fully ready, right? It's great if we can bring them into the workplace. It's great if we can provide them with opportunities at real world projects and also workplace learning opportunities. But we also have to make sure that we are readying our students, partnering with corporations, and giving them all the skills they need to be successful in the workplace. And I think that's going to be an important thing for us to look at closely, especially with high school students and high schools, across the US. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was really around how do we leverage technologies in a different way. Thomas talked about this when we talked about online learning, but I came from Verizon before I started at IBM. And at Verizon, we were very focused on where 5G was launching. How does 5G become ubiquitous? And are we making sure that we're not leaving underrepresented populations behind? So we were creating educational solutions that really leverage the power of 5G to provide augmented reality opportunities to students, to make sure they understood the future of technology and at least they had that exposure. So it was not something new that they would encounter down the line. So I think that preparation, especially with marginalized communities, to make sure they have access to new technologies that can engage their students and make them ready for these types of future jobs, I think that's extremely important. The other thing, at my current role at IBM, I'm focused on a whole different set of technologies: quantum computing, machine learning, AI. So we make sure we give that exposure to students as well. Again, it's important for them to understand what these technologies are. It's important for them to understand how this is going to change the workplace. What are the types of skills they need to be successful, especially when these technologies become more ubiquitous. And then I think there is a place where machine learning and AI can be used to enhance the learning and teaching experience. I don't think we've found that sweet spot yet. And it's not replacing teachers. It never will. But I think there's something around how you could use AI to better understand your students, especially in a world where a lot of the teaching is virtual and you don't have that day-to-day in-person engagement with your students. How do you use those type of technologies to better understand them and to enhance your teaching? And I think there's a lot more opportunity for that this year as well.
Thank you, Justina. I think your point about so many positions being open right now, and really as a result of the pandemic and all the different things going on, it really has just opened up so many possibilities and created, as you said, this different trajectory for young people going straight into the workforce, making a lot of money in a lot of times, and not going to community college or not going to the 4-year universities. And so that is going to be an impact on the educational system writ large, and the pros and cons of all of that and figuring that out. So I'm glad you're thinking about it. And I'm glad that IBM is thinking about that right now and what that means for our system. And we really appreciate your being here and giving us a perspective from the business community. It's so valuable. So thank you so much for that. And then now we have Punya. And Punya, I do remember that in one of your recently published works, you argued for co-creating with children and their families, and you called it, I think, a humanizing curriculum. For those listening who might not have had the opportunity to read this, what's the key idea here, and how do you recommend school-based leaders and teachers begin that process? And what trends do you think, from your point of view, matter for 2021?
Thank you, Heather, and for inviting me to this panel. And just listening to what everybody has said so far, thank you for your insights. Very helpful. I mean, like Thomas said, I'm learning as much as hopefully I can contribute. So in the piece around the humanizing curriculum, and I'm seeing there's a question from Craig Horn as well, sort of asking about like, how can we include families in that conversation? The point we were trying to make is that there is a resource here which, if you think about the way we have designed schools, we have created this box, and you come in there and your history, your past, all of that is sort of erased when you come into that space. And I'm speaking from, having grown up in India, where, my mother was an author in a native language there. I cannot read any of her books. So if you think about erasure of a culture and a colonial history there, right? I mean, what can be more tragic than the fact that I can't read books written by my mother? And yet, here is the irony of it. This language that I'm speaking now is what has given me access to my career and so on. So there is this tension, I think, there. And I think what we tried to talk about in that piece in particular, saying that maybe this pandemic has given us an opportunity through, whether it's the Zoom classroom or whatever it may be, to bring that family, that community into that learning space, to see that as a resource rather than as sort of a disadvantage or a weakness, sort of broadly to the point that I think Vanessa was sort of alluding to about sort of there is a rich history and culture that we are neglecting here. I want to take a slightly different tack in thinking about what's the future and so on. So around 2 years ago, when the pandemic first started, we started this webinar called Silver Lining for Learning. And every Saturday for 2 years now, we have been meeting with educators, innovators, students from across the world. And so it has given me sort of a sense of what is happening and what is changing. And so I want to share a few insights from that. One, the fact of resilience that Vanessa, you spoke about. Teachers are demonstrating that, educational leaders are demonstrating that every day. But at the same time, Thomas, the point you made about burnout and sort of this feeling of, that just how long can we keep this up in a political and a cultural climate that right now is quite anti-education in many, many ways. We can go into all the various things that are happening in school boards and book bannings and what have you, that instead of being supported, they are being sort of vilified in that process. I think that's it. So there is a lot of stress there, but educators have tried, it's amazing across the world, to do the best by the learners that they can. The other big insight that sort of came, and I think this is resonant with some of the points that were made before as well, that if you look at the schools or the educational institutions that did well as in under the circumstances, it had to depend on the culture and the systems and the values that they had built into their organization before the pandemic. So if as an organization you cared about every child, if as an organization you gave teachers agency, those organizations, if you approach the work that you do with sort of like a design mindset that we are going to try And if that doesn't work, we'll do something else. We are not going to look for guidance from the state or from whoever, right? Those organizations did much better. So the example that I gave is of San Diego, school system, where schools in California closed down on a Friday. Monday, these people were ready. And I did a podcast called Value Laden, where I speak to educational leaders who are inspiring in what they do. And what the school superintendent there told me is that the whole school came together under one thing. Like, our job is to meet the needs of those students who have the least access. So whether it's second language learners, whether it's learners who have special needs, we're going to meet their needs first. And then, because the ones who have the resources, they will be able to cope. So I think our organizations need to start thinking much deeper about the kinds of values and principles that we truly care about. And those who do end up doing better. And finally, Vanessa, I want to build on something that you said, because it really touched me. The virus does not discriminate. It doesn't care what the color of my skin is, doesn't care what my religion is, it doesn't. However, we are looking at some generational trauma here that I don't see many people talk about. The statistics for children who have lost a caregiver. This is from the CDC. I mean, I read this somewhere, I couldn't believe it. I had to actually go to the CDC website and dig out the report that this is really true. 1 in 4 African-American children has lost a caregiver. 1 in 3 Hispanic children has lost a caregiver. These are the children who are going to be in our classrooms tomorrow. They're going to be in our colleges 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The kinds of emotional, social, physical support that they need, I don't think our educational institutions have considered that. Right when the pandemic started, I sort of wrote a tongue-in-cheek couple of blog posts, which ended up becoming an article called The Value of School. And in fact, because I said it was tongue-in-cheek, the last item I had on that list was that people go to school to learn. Because schools are centers of community. There are centers where children, for the most part, get their first experience of arts and the humanities and sports. They're usually the centers where sometimes that's the only place kids get a warm meal. And so when we think of this next generation that's coming up, the discrimination, our discriminatory systems, which already disadvantaged people, have actually made that worse. And I don't think that the conversations we are having now have often gotten into that. So though I am an ed tech person, if you look at my bio, I've done work in educational technology, I'm also very suspicious of the educational technologies that are coming into our classrooms and spaces today. I don't know how many of you know about these proctoring software systems, where my daughter had to take exams where she had to be absolutely still. Nobody could open a door because that system was measuring her quote unquote engagement. Can you think of a more distrusting educational system than that? And can we predict which communities will get more of those than others? Which were the communities that could create learning pods and have a teacher who could live in that bubble, and which didn't? So I think we really have to think around issues of equity, access, justice very deeply. This pandemic has made those worse. And I see a lot of lip service maybe to it, not necessarily, but I think that to me is the biggest challenge that we face going forward. And I hate to end on a pessimistic note, but I really do think that we have to confront the differential impact that this pandemic has had on people across the country, across the world for that matter.
Thank you, Punya, for your insights there. I had not heard the statistics about the loss of the caregivers and the impact specifically on the African-American community and Hispanic community. So thank you for sharing that with us. But I think you're right, and several of you have already mentioned this, is that, just currently our system as it is, and even though we have variation in systems across the US and across the world, we're just not set up for that. And it's like, how do we make those changes? And it would be nice if somebody could swoop in and create a diagram and all of a sudden we have this new way of thinking. But it seems to me that so often it really just gets down to individuals, having to make individual changes, and then collectively trying to figure out as educators how to make, and policymakers how to make those systemic changes. So thank you for those insights. I'm going to turn to there's so many good questions in the chat right now, and you guys can see them as well. So be prepared to jump on some of these if you have some thoughts.
Hiller.
Yes, there's Vanessa. Yes.
Before you go to the questions, may I just make an observation, please?
Yes.
So many of you said what we learn from each other, and that we learn more by listening to each other. And I want to echo that. And I want to take, because I don't deal in the things in the present in the way that you all do, I deal in the history. But I want to bring this full circle, and I want to take some of the very things that you said and take it to a point of saying, we have models, we've done all of this in this place we've ignored. And I want to go directly at Hiller's point about how do you redo it? I just took notes on things you all were saying. Thomas, you were talking about living in really challenging times. Okay, we already established they did that. The racial unrest, lynchings, we got that. The health challenges, they did all of that. The teacher shortages, the buildings, we got all of that. You talked about the schools not being designed for these challenges. Well, they weren't, right? They weren't designed for any of the challenges that Black educators face either. But when you talked about the way you saw schools supporting today, all of the things that you talk about can be traced into professional development networks where people were able to do these exact things over time and over geography, and not in the individual ways that you're talking about, but really systemically. So I'm just stunned, right? When I hear you talk about what's working, and I'm going, this was working in Hello Professor. This was working in their highest potential. They had a model to disseminate the kinds of things and we don't, right? So I think that's so important. Justina, you were talking about all of the practices, which are just amazing to me. But this is the Booker T. Washington Du Bois so-called debate. In real time, there was no debate. This is an academic creation. If you look at the schools themselves, the ability to channel kids into what the economy needed in that moment, we've done that, right? So there's a whole history kind of on how we think about how to channel that into. So I got so excited about that. When you were talking, Punya, about the resilience versus the burnout and the values being built into the organization, I'm just going, wow, building on who the student is, right? The curriculum, the parents, what they bring, and how we work in collaboration with them. We humanizing the curriculum, all of that. We've done it all historically, which takes me back to my point of people who have the access contemporarily, which all of you do. I think we would be better served if we could build on how we know it was done before, clearly changing it to a current context. They didn't know about artificial intelligence, right? But they knew about, let's learn how to use a camera, which was a big deal in the 1940s. And we see Horace Mann Bond working with that with kids, or how to use a record player, right? So a different kind of thing, but the concepts I think are the same. Hiller, you raised this point. We keep talking about how we don't know how to do these things. Yes, we do. We do know how to do these things, but the how is in the history and pushing us to where we go. And then I'm gonna shut up and y'all can talk the entire time and answer all the questions. The reason it worked historically was because of the networks. Professional networks and advocacy networks that did very much what you're trying to do today, Hiller. Cross business with professors, right? Cross people, different stakeholders and constituent groups. So the networks help deliver the advocacy, the ones that cross disciplines, and the professional networks delivered the seamless kind of instruction that all of you talked about that we need. If you look at us today, professionally and in advocacy, we don't have them. So our inability, the reason we keep talking about one little piece and one little piece, and this is my research, and I know this, and I know this, but we can't stitch it together, is because we are not networked together in ways that allow us to raise the threshold simultaneously. And that, for me, is one of the biggest implications of the history for the present. I'm sorry about that sermon, forgive me, everybody, but I want to get that in there because I'm so excited listening to you. All of this can be done. The question is, as one said some time ago, do we have the willpower to do so? That's the end of my sermon. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you, Vanessa. We really appreciate that perspective. And I'm glad that you circle back around and challenge us on that, because that's very, very important. Does anybody on the panel want to add to what Vanessa just said?
I do want to just make a comment, or it may be a question. I think Vanessa's spot on. I think we have a lot of best practices. We have a lot of experience in how some of these things have been done. What do you think about how quickly technology is moving? It's even when you think of where we were 30, 40, even 20 years ago, the advancements now are really at a pace that whether it's our students, our teachers, how do we make sure that we can combine this acceleration around technology and what it's doing for jobs, for skills, and everything else to where we were, years ago?
For me, it's so simple. When you create in the networks always included a plethora of people. So in the networks, if you have the cutting edge people, the scientists and others who understand where the technology is going, if we have foundation leaders and people like yourself who understand where and how to put the dollars, and they're in conversation with the professional leaders that Punya works with or that Thomas knows about, they're all in the same room. Let's just imagine we launched it, let's just say between North Carolina and Georgia, because this is North Carolina, I'm sitting in Georgia. And historically, they had very close relationships. So you could see the same kinds of things happening in both states in similar eras. How does it happen? Because they are networked together, because they are thought leaders operating behind the scenes, right? In concert with professional educators, you got higher ed involved. And in this think tank space, you're able to come up with a strategy. But within each state, you have grassroots organizations linked to professional development spaces for school leaders. So when you put them together, you can now take a Horace Tate. So I learned this right in Lost Education for Horace Tate. A Horace Tate could put his finger into any community in Georgia and could influence anything happening anywhere in the South because of the networks. So if we don't understand the networks, then we think it's impossible. But if we understand the networks, so why did I send you a private message that said, let's talk? Because, I'm getting ready to retire, happily so. But I'm thinking about the foundation people that I know who've got a grassroots community thing going on. I'm thinking about this thing going on with churches. I'm thinking about higher ed professors I already know who are trying to do stuff. I'm thinking about my connections with the National Academy and the research base. And I'm saying, hey, this information needs to get into the hands of others. Mm-hmm. But that's just me. Look how powerful it would be if all of us met together, not on Zoom, but where it could be on Zoom, but together behind the scenes and said, all right, I know this person, I know this, let's connect this how, this one, Punya, let's put this over here. How are we gonna fix this? Black educators, unfortunately, critiqued desegregation by saying, when we went to the white meetings, all they did was talk. At our meetings, we tried to solve the problems. And I'm sorry to say, as a former president of one of our major organizations that shall remain nameless, with great respect to all of my colleagues, we have too often failed to adopt the problem solved, which requires the behind the scenes collaboration, because we don't know that it can be done, because we don't know the history.
Vanessa, thank you for challenging our thinking, because I think it is easy to think that our times are too complex. But I love how you just went right to the heart of the matter and said, no, it's actually simple, and explained it that way. So thank you for that contribution. I did want to go to the chat, and Craig Horn had a question, and he was our first person to give a question. And Craig is one of our friends of the Friday Institute. He's talking about, is it time for outcome-based educational processes that meet the students where they are? I mean, Vanessa, we've been talking about this for a long time, outcomes-based education, but I don't know if any of you have any insights, maybe in your states, about how far along are the different states with outcome-based education, and what values do you see in that area? Thank you, Craig, for that question. Does anybody have a point of view on that?
I just want to say, in Georgia, Black educators started the whole testing movement, trying to figure out how you assess for outcomes. And White Education Association said they were doing such a good job, we should think about testing too.
Okay. I know in North Carolina, I mean, there is continued conversation and trying to come up with models for what that would look like. So I'm just interested if any others have that. So Craig, thank you for that question. Let me see what else we've got here in the chat. What roles can the arts play in education moving forward? The arts are often where people come together. So that's a question. Punya, I should probably give that to you, since you're my artist comrade here.
Thank you. Well, I mean, just the fact that you called me the artist comrade, that means you know what my answer is. And the reason for, and the reason for that, and I appreciate that, thank you. The reason for that is because in some ways, the deepest expressions of humanity are in the arts. Just as a piece of music or a piece of literature or a poem is deeply human. And funnily enough, I include the sciences among the arts, because I think that the knowledge that we have gained from science is also a deeply human thing. But I think what has happened is that through this emphasis on quote unquote STEM and so on, that we have forgotten the humanistic aspects of STEM, and we have neglected the genuine value that the arts and the humanities bring. The single biggest thing that the arts do, they help us see other worlds, they help us empathize, they help us see other perspectives. And if there's anything that this world needs right now, is for all of us to develop that. And so I think that the arts are need to be an integral part of how we think about school, how we, and in terms, actually, and even in brute economic terms, as we see the rise of AI, as we see the rise of machine learning, as we see the rise of robotics and automation, a lot of the standard jobs that are which we thought that required human intervention, whether it is analysis of an X-ray or it is translation of language, are increasingly going to become automated. And if you look at what the biggest industries are today, a lot of the big industries, one of the biggest exports that America has, it's its cultural capital. Is its music, is its movies, it is this video games. And so I think if you just look at it in brute economic terms, it behooves us to pay attention to the arts. But I would say there is a deeper reason that we need to do that, because that's what makes us human in some profound and important way. And if that is not a part of an education, then I think we are missing something fundamental.
And I agree. And I think so often, we do fall into this thinking where we think the arts and the science and the technology, maybe are mutually exclusive. And we know that most of us know that they aren't, but that does happen sometimes even with policy. So I think we need to learn to resist that trap. And obviously it needs to be both and, not either or. So thank you for that comment. And then I've got another question here. This is from Evelyn Moore. She says, too many school systems are dictated by political forces who mostly don't know much about the total curriculum. And so I think probably we can all relate to that comment. And I don't know if any of you want to tackle that and have any insights to share there. And what would we do about that?
Well, as I just put in the chat, the policymakers were always against Black education. When people wrote about Black history, they basically wrote a history of what the school boards wanted the schools to become. They just missed what the schools actually became, right? They missed the resilience. But their history of what the school boards wanted is very much documented in the lack of resources, the poor facilities, the poor books, the whole 9 yards. But what we see in Black education was people working against and around a school board. We see state requirements, and we see people putting in place a curriculum that goes beyond what the state says. We do also, when you see the arts in wonderful kinds of ways, and not at the expense of science, right? But all combined. So I understand policymakers have a role to play. I get that. And I'm not saying, I certainly wouldn't want to be on a Zoom saying we should ignore them. But I'm a former high school teacher. And I don't recall giving a former high school teacher in North Carolina for that matter. And I don't recall caring diddly squat about what the school board said I should be teaching, because once I closed my door, I understood what my children needed. And I found ways, as Thomas has talked about in his work, I found ways to deliver the curriculum you asked for and to also do what I knew needed to be done. So here again, we can get bogged down on what the school board says. I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm just saying that they don't have the final word. Educators are supposed to know how to educate. And if we don't know how to educate, then we need to shut down all the schools of education and quit. I mean, we're supposed to know how to educate children. And so if we do, then I think we need to take the lead in figuring out how to do what we need to do best. And by the way, when I talked earlier about the advocacy, we also have a role to advocate, and that's behind the scenes. That's where the trickster model comes in that I talk about in Hello Professor or Lost Education. Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of ways to get around people tying us around our necks. But we have to do that not on Zooms, but behind the scenes, talking to one another and figuring out how to vote out who we don't want in and what we need to do. But this is not, we did this.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to one more question here. This is from Jamie Gillespie. These days, there are students with phones that can be used to record teachers and laws in some states that allow parents to sue teachers for saying things they don't like. So that is just one reality in the teachers' world right now that I think that it's just hard to process that, but that is a reality with our teachers. So that does present difficulties when you're in the classroom. And we didn't have that before we had that technology, right?
But teachers also have a responsibility to work closely with parents. And when they work closely with parents and convince parents that we're working together as a team, that doesn't mean you can't be sued. Not saying that, but I'm saying there might be a way to work around that too.
Right. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. And what I thought we would do for our closing, by the way, this was fabulous. Thank you so much for bringing your A game and your energy. I just really appreciate it so much. It's been the highlight of my week so far. But we have a few minutes left, and I was hoping to close out if each one of you could give us your top thought that you'd like to leave with us and with the audience in terms of what matters for 2022. We've talked about a lot. But just give me a word, a phrase. What is the top thing that if you had to come up with one thing, what is it that you want to leave the audience with? And Justina, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I don't have just a word or a phrase, unfortunately, but I do think this year we have to figure out how to support our students as we continue to work through this pandemic. We have students that are in communities that have been marginalized. A lot of them were not getting the support they needed before the pandemic. the pandemic has actually made things worse for them. And they don't always have all of the, resources and everything they need to be successful. So we really need to figure out whether it's through the use of engaging technologies, whether it's through the use of mentors and teachers, whether it's through tutors or corporations like IBM coming in and figuring out how do we support the students and make sure we put them on a path of success. I think it's critical that we focus on this and make sure that those students have what they need to be successful, because my concern is that this is going to exacerbate the issue and that we are going to spend a lot of time in making sure that they are caught up and they can be successful. So that is always something that's top of mind for me as we think about our students that are in very low income communities.
Thank you, Justina. Thomas, what's top of mind for you as we close out?
I think there's some real opportunities right now. In some ways, struggle promotes innovation, struggle promotes creative thinking. But it's not to say that it's easy, or that there's easy solutions to this, but I'm optimistic of the good ideas and the things that'll come out of people figuring out what to do going forward as they struggle in this moment. And I'll just point to two fronts. One is school systems that are really taking this moment to say, how could we do things differently? How do we not just get stuck trying to run harder and faster to do things the way we've always done to solve the problems we're in? And the other one is, and Vanessa kind of touched on this, is the power of individual teachers. Teachers in some ways are super constrained. You're given your class roster, you're given your schedule, you're given your standards you're supposed to cover. But when you close that classroom door, there's a lot of opportunities for teachers to try things and experiment and explore new ways and better ways to support their students.
Thank you, Thomas. Punya, do you have a word?
Lots of words. I'm a professor. I can go on forever. I get paid, I get bonuses based on number of words I spout out. No, I'm kidding. I think I just firstly want to thank everybody on the panel here. I think that there is a strong feeling I have that people want things to go back to normal. And I think we should recognize that school, the way it was structured, or schooling or education, did not really work for many people. So there are actually some children who thrived in this because they could study at their own, like examples Thomas gave. The question is, can we create systems that allow that to happen rather than it be individual cases? So I'd love to see how we can come up with newer systems of collaboration or working together, like Vanessa was speaking of, both at the educator level and at the student level. Because otherwise it becomes isolated incidents, and there needs to be a systemic way of thinking about it.
Right, and accessing the networks, like Vanessa said. Thank you. So Vanessa, I'm going to give you the last word. What's top of mind for you?
You all have been so kind and gracious to let me say too much. So I apologize for that, and I thank you. But I do have a lot of energy about it for reasons that you can see. When we say we need to solve these problems, and I've seen them solved, it's hard, or at least addressed, it's hard not to be enthusiastic. I like to see North Carolina State do something and start a network. I want to be in a place where people quit calling and asking me to talk and be a talking head, and somebody calls and has me sit down behind the scenes and let's figure this out. And I challenge Hiller, North Carolina State, to do that. Call us all together and let us work through our networks, and let's see what kinds of things can actually be put in place. The truth of the matter is we can't just work through the existing networks. The networks that worked, as I chronicled in Lost Education of Horace Tate and in Hello Professor, they don't exist anymore. And the networks we have, we sit on our own bottoms. And so the networks that we have may be doing a great job where they are, but the problem is they're not connected with other people. Connect them.
Okay, thank you so much. We're out of time now. I think we could have gone another hour, but I hope the discussion has spurred you to think in new ways and has inspired you in some way to continue with your efforts for transformative education. So everyone have a great day and take care of yourself. Thank you.